Last year, I watched a video of someone going through the Sonic the Hedgehog series and covering every time it passed the Bechdel test. After watching it, I thought to myself and came up with the brilliant idea, what if I did the same thing, but made it about Thomas? So if any of you are unfamiliar with the Bechdel test, here's a brief summary of what it is. The Bechdel test is a way to measure female adjacency in a story/work of fiction. There are 3 required criteria to passing. A. It has to feature at least 2 named female characters. 2. They have to talk to each other. And D. Their conversation has to be about something other than a man. Thomas and Friends, being a mostly male-dominated series, has very little of these moments, especially in the first half of the series. In this video, I'll be covering every instance of the series passing the Bechdel test and see how well it is at accomplishing it. Before writing the script, I was a little divisive on whether or not I should go through with the idea for 2 reasons. 1. I'm very clearly a man. I knew it wouldn't be wrong for a guy like me to talk about this topic, as either way, regardless if this was being presented by a woman or not, the presentation would be unchanged. I guess I was just thinking about the possibility of a random kid commenting below the video something like, "But aren't you a boy?" It might still happen, in which case, I don't care. That's not the focus of this video. It plays nothing to the topic besides irony, maybe. And 2, I wasn't sure if there was a requirement to how much is needed in a scene for it to pass. For example, and spoilers I guess, in Rosie's Carnival Special, Emily and Rosie have a dialogue exchange that lasts under 8 seconds. Not much of a conversation to be had. Another thing I was worried about was the presence of a male character during a scene where 2 girls are talking to each other, but not acknowledging him. Example here, A Blooming Mess. Thomas and Edward are intentionally a part of the story and the scene technically, but Emily and Mavis don't directly acknowledge their existence during their conversation. After doing some research, I learned that neither are official requirements, as the only rules necessary to passing were what I listed off at the start. Some media might have stricter standards, but for the kind of series Thomas is, I'd say it's not a fundamental. For this video, I'll only be covering Thomas and Friends. I won't be covering the Railway series or Engines Go, and of course, we'll have to wait for the 2026 reboot for me to make any comments. I can't remember everything from the Railway series, but as far as I remember, there are 0 instances of the series passing the Bechdel test. While I'm not sure this is the only occurrence, one of, if not the only time, where 2 female characters are conversing is Mavis and Daisy in the story Mavis. But it fails to pass because the 2 are having a conversation about Toby, who was a man. A man-tram. And as for AEG, I've watched every episode and special unlike most people, although there still isn't too many moments of it passing, with the show being shorter, having a balanced main cast of 4 females and 4 males, that is, if you count Bruno as a main. Moments like that are not as far in between. And even if it doesn't pass, it does do a lot better of utilizing its female cast. And since characters like Carly and Sandy are paired up a lot, scenes with just the 2 of them talking are pretty frequent, as well as lengthy. This is something that I think Engines Go really strode in, and I'd like to see this continue into the 2026 reboot. But we'll just have to wait and see. Right from the start, to get to our first instance of Thomas passing the Bechdel test, we have to jump all the way to Series 8 and skip over the first 7 series and Magic Railroad. Yep. It takes that long for them to pass. Girl-on-girl interaction wasn't very common throughout the classic series. Annie and Clarabelle usually only ever spoke in unison, Daisy and the coaches don't speak directly to each other in Daisy's debut episode, Mavis doesn't even so much as talk to Daisy in the adaptation of her debut story. Mavis actually goes a long while in the series without speaking to another girl character. Magic Railroad is the most that we get of 2 females having conversation, but both instances fail as they're referring to Bernard Stone throughout them, who, say it with me, is a man. Okay, this is post-editing Sammy speaking. I was wrong. Magic Railroad does pass the Bechdel test. Stacy and Lily do have an exchange where they don't talk about a man.
Stacy, did you know my grandma?
My mother did. She said Tasha was a wonderful dancer.
The same thing would go too for Lily and her mom at the end of this scene, but Lily's mom isn't named, so it didn't count. I thought before that in order for a scene to pass, the entire conversation had to be free of men, but that's not a required criterion. They just have to have at least one back and forth exchange without mentioning a boy for it to pass. I could be wrong, apologies if I am, I'm not an expert on this, but I figured I'd point that out in case someone were to correct me. I do mention later that The Great Race was the first movie to pass, but no, Magic Railroad was, and it's also the first instance of Thomas passing the Bechdel test. So anything you hear after that contradicts this, well, don't take old Sammy's words for it. Also, I completely failed to mention Jack and the Sword Construction Company. It's a spin-off, but it still counts as being a part of the series, and there is a moment at the end of Mud Glorious Mud where Isabella and Miss Jenny interact. So, if Magic Railroad or Jack count as being a part of the classic series to any of you, then those two are the only moments of it passing the Bechdel test. Anyway, back to me spreading misinformation. Emily's Adventure from Series 8 is the first episode to have a girl-to-girl dialogue exchange without the mention of a boy. The dialogue exchange between Emily and Elizabeth is very short and brief. Emily says,
"Hurry up!"
And then Elizabeth responds with,
"Not if you ask like that!"
And Emily chimes back with,
"I've got an urgent delivery!"
And that was it. They do speak to each other again, but Pharmacol is mentioned, so that time it doesn't pass. Even though their first conversation doesn't amount to much of anything, it still counts. So Emily's Adventure passes the Bechdel test. Before we move on to our next occurrence, I would like to point out that there is an implied off-screen interaction with Molly and Emily in Molly's Special, as well as Rosie and Alice and Thomas in the birthday mail. And Emily and Mavis are on screen together and Emily knows best, but they don't say anything to each other. I'm not going to point out every time there's an off-screen interaction or a scene featuring two girls that don't interact, but I figured for the model series it was at least worth noting because there's so little of those moments. But moving forward. The next instance of Thomas passing is in the series 12 episode, Rosie's Carnival Special. Our first episode with two girls as the main leads. And what does it do? Have them separated throughout most of the story. I'll give this episode this. It gave a non-Steam Team / narrow gauge character the lead role. We also killed Stepney, which, I don't think anyone will miss him. Rosie and Emily do manage to have one short dialogue exchange at the end of the episode.
"I hope we can work together on another special. The sooner, the better. Working with you is the best of all."
Once again, it's hardly anything, but it counts. So Rosie's Carnival Special passes. Our next passing is 19 episodes from now. In the series 13 episode, A Blooming Mess. Finally, after so long, Emily and Mavis talk to each other. Like I said before, Thomas and Edward are in the scene, but they're not a part of their conversation in any way. So, it counts. In the next series, there is an interaction between Emily and the laundry lady in Pinky Ponky Pickup. However, it doesn't end up passing because the laundry lady isn't named. I'm also not sure if there has to be a back and forth exchange between two girls for it to pass. I don't believe that's important either, as it's still an exchange, but this one just barely misses it. After this, we go another long period without an episode passing the Bechdel test. 5 seasons and 5 movies later to be specific. In Not So Slow Coaches, we actually get a scene of Annie and Clarabelle talking to each other without the mention of Thomas or any other boy character.
"This is the fastest we've ever been! I don't like it at all! I've got my eyes closed! Does it help? No, not really!"
You'd never get this out of the model series. Well, that and Annie and Clarabelle speaking in full sentences. From here on out, the girl-to-girl interaction should progressively become more frequent, whether the stories passes the test or not. And our next example demonstrates this to a great effect. Best Engine Ever is the first episode to properly commit to a co-female lead story. Rosie's Carnival Special had Rosie and Emily separated for most of it, and the same doubles for A Blooming Mess. Granted, this is still mainly an Emily-centered episode, but Caitlin still receives a great amount of screen time. And because of that, Emily and Caitlin manage to have multiple conversations throughout the episode without the mention of a male character. Emily and Marion also have a brief interaction.
Lift your shovel high and say, "I'm a very special engine and there's no other like me!"
But I don't have a shovel.
Get one!
Such a great story all around, but you didn't need me to know that already. I feel like there's gonna be someone now in the comments saying that they don't like the story. So we do get our first movie pass with The Great Race. Annie and Clarabelle talk first at the start, and later Emily and Ashima talk to each other twice. Or technically once, since Ashima was talking to everyone in this scene. Congratulations! It took you 12 movies for you to have one scene of two girls exchanging dialogue without mentioning a guy.
Well done.
Next, we move on to literally my favorite episode of the CGI series, the rail car and the coaches. I so gotta talk about this episode someday because good god I love it so much. Daisy, Annie, and Clarabelle's banter is phenomenal. They balance off each other so well. Daisy is such an asshole, and then Annie and Clarabelle f*** with her. So good. I love them. I love this episode. So, with this episode also having 2 or 3 main female leads, it manages to pass. Our next moment is a few episodes later in 3 Steam Engine Scruff with Annie and Clarabelle. I'm not gonna linger long on this one, as I don't need to spend too much time on every episode that passes. Just know that it does, and let's move forward. In the following episode, we move on to our last instance in Series 20 with Engine of the Future, which has Dowager Hat and the Duchess of Boxford interacting. I was debating also whether this moment counted or not, as Dowager Hat is indirectly referring to Hugo, but she still isn't directly acknowledging him and is only referring to the experience of traveling on him. So I'm gonna say it counts. Speaking of Dowager Hat, we now go on to her episode in the following series, Dowager Hat's Busy Day. Yet again, I was stumped about this one. Emily and Dowager Hat's conversation during the middle of the episode doesn't pass, as they refer to male characters throughout it, and Emily's exchange with Annie doesn't pass because Annie mentions Thomas. The one I wasn't sure about was at the start when Dowager Hat is assigning Thomas and Emily's jobs. The conversation that's had is technically a mixed gender exchange, as it first starts with Dowager Hat speaking to Thomas and then to Emily, but the last back and forth exchange between Emily and Dowager doesn't acknowledge Thomas.
Excuse me, but I already know my first job is to take cars of scrap to the scrapyard today.
Don't worry about that, Emerald. I'll sort something out.
The broader context is still centered around Thomas. However, the test only asks if they're talking about a man, not if a man has spoken in the same scene. So taking that into account, it does pass structurally. Like I said before, I'm not an expert on this. I guess with that statement, I should retract my comment of their conversation later not passing, since there are exchanges that don't mention a male character. But that's only if you're not counting the conversation in its entirety. 6 episodes later, we have Emily and Carly having a conversation in New Crane on the dock. Part of it's inaudible, but I'm gonna say they weren't talking about a boy here, so it passes. Now our next 2 instances I'm gonna group together, cause for the 10th time in this video I was perplexed to say if these counted or not. In Terrence Breaks the Ice, Annie and Clarabelle have a brief exchange during the flashback sequence, and then the moment immediately shifts when Annie begins addressing Thomas. In Daisy's Perfect Christmas, Daisy is talking to Ryan, Judy, and Jerome. Judy and Daisy have 2 back and forth dialogue exchanges. The first one doesn't refer to a boy, but the second one kind of does, as Judy indirectly addresses Jerome, and Daisy responds by indirectly addressing all 3. Take a shot at how many times I used the word indirectly throughout this video. Now, the exchange in Terrence Breaks the Ice does count, as they were just talking about the weather, even though the perception pivots to Thomas right after. In Daisy's Perfect Christmas, yes, Ryan and Jerome are a part of the conversation, but those exchanges between Daisy and Judy aren't centered around them. So that episode 2 passes. I really hope I don't have another debate with myself for the remainder of this video. This homie ain't good at this. So now we move on to the era that tried pushing its diversity by adding in more female characters to the cast. For how this era handled its female cast is a subject for another video, but let's see how they were at having 2 females conversing with one another. In Big World Big Adventures, Nia talks to an unnamed Diesel, and there's an off-screen interaction with her and Natalie, so the movie doesn't pass. Our first instance of this new era passing is in the Series 22 episode, What Rebecca Does. Rebecca talks to Belle, Marion, Annie, Clarabelle, and Daisy, all without addressing a male character. I think this is the most we've gotten so far, multiple girl characters interacting in one episode. I like that out of all the gimmicky-esque characters that are featured in the series, they used 3 of them who are girls to interact with Rebecca, which I think was a great decision. I like all these characters. Yes, even Belle, stop acting like characters like her and Flynn are worldly hated, cause they're not. I should make a rant on that topic someday. Apparently anyone who says that they like these characters are only pretending. You really gonna convince me Boko was more interesting than Billy or Charlie? Bull, stop playing with me!
Sorry guys, I got off topic.
In Thomas's animal arc, Emily and Carly talk to each other again. Nothing to say here, but it passes. You should get the jig by now. Our next, and surprisingly last episode this season to pass is Counting on Nia. Nia interacts with Annie and Clarabelle throughout most of the story, and they manage to have some exchanges without mentioning a male character. And that's it for Series 22. Not gonna lie, I thought there'd be more moments, but I guess not. Like, I remember these episodes a lot in comparison to other people, but it has been a while since I watched some of them. Not that it matters. Anyway, going on to Series 23, Episode 2, Crowning Around, has Ashima and Noor Jahan interacting, so that episode passes. And then the next episode, Chuckle Some Trucks, also passes with Emily and Rebecca interacting. At least I think. God damn! The reason why I say I think is because they're referring to the Trolls and Trucks in this conversation, who are technically not named characters, and while the ones on Sodor appear to be collectively male, they aren't conceived as male in the conversation, or really any conversation that involves them. In fact, they could go by any pronouns and we just don't know. So with that in mind, I'm saying it passes. The next episode to pass the test is Rangers of the Rails. This episode is noteworthy in my non-existent book because this is the first and only time where Emily, Nia, and Rebecca have a conversation together without any of the other Steam Team members involved. In fact, all the male characters that appear in this episode are only on screen for around a minute. Everyone else are girls. Now, whether that fact makes this episode good is up for debate, but I'm not here to really fixate on what opinions I have of these episodes, even though I low-key glazed the railcar on the coaches a few minutes ago. So next we move to Out of Sight, and by this point I really don't think I'm the right person to be looking into this. After Miss Jenny informs Brenda of her mistake and the moral of the story, Brenda says sorry to her. And that's it. So, and bruh, I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, it passes on a technicality level. Whether it's narratively satisfying is another question. The next episode, First Day on Sodor, does do a more proper job at passing the Bechdel test. Nia and Darcy have actual conversations here, and that's it for Series 23. Just one more left. And right off the bat, we got our first and only series premiere episode that passes. And Emily's best friend, Emily and Marion talk to each other. And since there's not many episodes left and I don't have much to comment on, not with the episodes themselves but the passes, I'm just gonna run by the remainder of the passes this season. Nia and the Unfriendly Elephant has Nia talking to both Rebecca and Belle. Gordon and Rebecca coming through has Rebecca and Henrietta making conversation. And lastly, Cleo the Road Engine and Cleo's First Snow both have Ruth and Cleo interacting. And those are all the instances of Thomas and friends passing the Bechdel test. So after tallying up every moment that passes, this is what I came out with. In total, Thomas passes the Bechdel test on 27 separate occasions. In 10 seasons, 2 movies, and the Jack spinoff. It doesn't pass in the remainder 14 seasons and 12 movies. Going by each classified era, if we count Magic Railroad and Jack as part of the classic series, that era only passed twice. The hit era additionally passes twice. The Nitrogen era passes once, the Arc era passes 10 times, and the Big World Big Adventures era passes 11 times. So, as you can see, the series doesn't pass very often, especially in the first 75% of it. Now, do I think it's a bad thing that Thomas doesn't pass the test that much? Not really. It's great to have moments like these to showcase that girl characters are capable of discussing things not centered around men, but I don't see it as a 100% essential. Even the person who came up with the Bechdel test, Alison Bechdel, stated that it's not meant to be taken literally. And besides, with the show being centered around sentient machines performing mostly regular jobs that machines in real life perform, gender is never the topic of any stories. They use different pronouns, but with the exception of a few moments like Emily, Annie, and Clarabelle being referred to as ladies, and Donald calling Emily Lassie and Douglas calling Gordon Big Man, it's never been a subject of a conversation. Well, unless you're that one magazine adaptation of What's the Matter with Henry. Seriously, what the hell? This existed? What I do think is more important is for girl characters to be at least well written and interesting. Thomas and Friends does a good job at doing that. For the most part. And I think All Engines Go also handled its female casts there very well. Here's hoping the 2026 reboot can do the same. With that all said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and to any girls watching this, Happy International Women's Day!